Committee of the Whole is called back to order from recess, but because we need to establish quorum, we will stay on recess until we reach quorum. Thank you.
We are back from recess. We left off on Senator Torres, an amendment by Senator Mary Torres. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to make an amendment to page 7, lines 3 to 8, to amend the bill to read Section 4, unappropriated annual general fund revenues collected in excess of appropriation, notwithstanding any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, the authorization relative to the expenditure of unappropriated annual general fund revenues collected in excess of appropriations to liquidate obligations for refunds, earned income tax credits, and prior years' vendor payables, contained in the first paragraph of Section 22436A of Article 4, Chapter 22, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, is hereby suspended. Expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by an appropriation or appropriations by a legislature in Guam pursuant to Section 22904 of Article 9, Chapter 22, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated. Mr. Chair, this amendment makes two simple but important changes to Section 4. First, it seeks to clarify the language regarding suspension that's contained in Section 22436A. The reason why I think we should be very careful here is because the statutory requirement to appropriate 2% to the rainy day fund is also contained in Section 22436A. I believe this amendment more clearly states what's part of Section A we are actually suspending. Secondly, the amendment makes an explicit reference to Article 9 of the same chapter. As my colleagues are aware, current law already requires that expenditures from the rainy day fund be authorized by an appropriation from the legislature. That mandate already exists outside of Section 4 of this proposed bill. That's found in Section 22904 of Article 9, Chapter 22, Title 5. Second, 22904, however, also has clear requirements about maintaining 10% of the average gross operating requirements or the spending fund by the general fund over the prior 3 fiscal years. And the fact that that obligation is not in Section 4 insinuates that we are not required to maintain that percentage. So to prevent any confusion, I therefore move to include this language as presented in the amendment that I proffered. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Again, this amendment proffered by Senator Torres is to lines 3 through 8 of page 7. Anyone on the Torres amendment? Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment to her amendment, and it's only to clarify the language that all unappropriated annual general fund revenues collected in excess of appropriations shall only be authorized by an appropriation or appropriation by the legislature in Guam. That's all it's for. It's nothing else. It's just to make sure that anything in excess, in fact, and the amendment is in the drive, and I think all my colleagues should have a copy. It's just to ensure clarification. That's all. Nothing more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A moment's recess while I review this amendment. We are back from recess. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to withdraw my amendment to the amendment. I've spoken with the sponsor of the amendment, and it was ready.
There's a motion to withdraw the Senator San Augustine's amendment to the amendment. On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In consultation with the retiring speaker about his amendment, we decided that it was best to just wrap his proposed amendment into my initial amendment. So I'd like to, at this point, withdraw my initial amendment and reintroduce another amendment.
On the motion to withdraw the initial amendment, any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to now proffer an amendment to page 7, and it'll be to lines 1 to 8, the whole section 4 of page 7. And essentially, what we're doing is we're adding to the title of section 4 the rainy day fund expenditures. Essentially, we are rearranging the paragraph with regard to the reference to section 22436A, so that it's clear what part of that section is being suspended. We are adding the words unappropriated annual general fund revenues collected in excess of appropriations shall only be authorized by an appropriation or appropriations by a legislature in Guam. This amendment, this addition just makes clear what the net effect of suspending that section, that part of the section is. Basically, the section right now tells us to pay any revenues collected in excess of appropriations from the general fund to liquidate obligations for refunds, earned income tax credit, and prior years payables. By inserting this language, we're essentially clarifying that by suspending that, we are also then requiring that any funds collected in excess of the appropriation shall only be authorized by an appropriation by the legislature in Guam. And then the other amendment is we bifurcated that paragraph in section 4 to be explicit about the rainy day funds, and inserting the language that the expenditures from the rainy day fund shall only be authorized by an appropriation or appropriations by a legislature in Guam. And we cite the section that governing that power, and that's pursuant to section 22904 of Article 9, Chapter 22, Title 5. And that is the section that has to do with deposits and appropriations to the rainy day fund. So basically, the amendments to the section are, as I stated on day 1 of the budget the session for the Budget Act. It was basically to add clarity to what exactly we were suspending, and how we wanted the funds from those two sources, whether the rainy day fund or the unappropriated excess revenues collected in excess of appropriations, how we wanted that appropriated. And that was by explicit authority and appropriation only by the legislature. So I believe, Mr. Chair, that these amendments, and with the help of my good colleague and his input, it makes it very clear about what we are suspending and what the disposition of those expenditures from those funds are to be, and that is by an appropriation by us. So I believe this clears up the language, and there's no confusion about what part of that section 22436A is actually going to be suspended. And I ask my colleagues for their support of this amendment for clarity's sake.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone on the amendment? Senator San Augustine?
Mr. Chair, I'm in full support of this amendment. She made it very clear, the author of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the Torres and San Augustine amendment? If there's no one else wishing to speak on this amendment, I will allow the author to close at this time. Senator Torres, you may close.
Nothing further to add, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. On the amendment proffered by Senator Torres and Senator San Augustine, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries.
Mr. Chair, can we just...
All right, we will take a moment's recess. We are having some technical difficulties with some of the microphones. We will take a moment's recess to address the technical difficulties with our audio system.
Thank you, Mr.
We're back from recess. The next amendment we have is from Senator Nelson to line 26, page 7. This is a joint amendment with Senator Nelson, Senator Shelton, and Senator San Augustine. Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On line 26, page 7, I'm looking to add a amendment for revenue collections in excess of federal income tax collections of Section 30 funds. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, funds in excess of the adopted revenue levels enumerated in 1B of Section 2 of this chapter in the amount of $962,500 shall be appropriated to the Guam Charter School Council Fund for the purpose of increasing the per-pupil cost by $500 per pupil. And Mr. Chair, this is in response to the panel we had earlier discussing the revenue projections and collections before we moved into this exercise of amendments, where they confirmed that the governor did request for the $80.1 million in Section 30 funds, and we have appropriated $74.9 million. So in anticipation of receiving that money, we look to utilize the remainder of, what's 80.1 minus 7, $5 million, give or take, to fund the charter schools, $500 per pupil. We've seen in the most recent news that the $7,000 appropriation per pupil is not realistic, and it will also hinder their availability to provide educational resources to their students. And we don't want to leave any of our students or our children behind when it comes to education, and so I ask my colleagues for their support in this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone else on the amendment?
Can I,
Senator Tydegui?
just asking where, is this SB 276 TCNL 26P7 COTW, that's correct?
Yes, this is
Okay.
SB 276 TCN L26 P7. And so this amendment is sponsored by Senators Nelson, Shelton, and San Augustine to line 26 of page 7. Anyone on the amendment? Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to make an amendment to that amendment, or no, I'd have to wait until it's passed, or it's allowed?
Yes.
Okay, I have an amendment to her amendment, and it's to add you'll find it on SB 276 JSSA, line 26, page 7. It's an added line that says, after the word chapter, or from the 2% general fund reserved in section 2.1 of chapter 1, Public Law 36-54, General Appropriation Act of 22. This is in reference to the rainy day fund. In the event the access doesn't come in, to ensure that the school year continues and they get the $7,500 per pupil, this is the backup. That's what it's intended for. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. There's been a motion to add an amendment to the amendment. On that amendment to the amendment, would anyone like to speak to that? Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Just for clarity, the proposed amendment to the amendment is to add reference of any funds, general funds collected in excess of the fiscal year 22 budget. Is that correct? I was having a hard time.
Does the author to the amendment?
Yes, it is, because back in this year, during the energy credit bill, we identified any funds put into the rainy day fund. That's correct.
So your proposed amendment to the amendment is to insert "or" and reference that bill, right, in the same amount, correct? It's just that we don't have it written in front, and that's why I was asking. But I'm not requesting that it be written. I'm just clarifying for my edification.
Does the author yield?
Yes, and she's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Tydegui, then Senator Dueñas. Senator Tydegui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the amendment to the amendment and incorporating that section, or from 2% general fund reserve. Now, we all know that in a bill that was recently passed to allow the credit for GPA. 15 million was set aside and appropriated to the rainy day fund. 15 million, I'm sorry, was appropriated there. And then inadvertently, 13 million plus was also appropriated to the rainy day fund. I don't think it was intended by this body to appropriate almost, $30,000, close to $30,000, million dollars into the rainy day fund. It was just the 15 million. But it wasn't found until after the bill had been passed and signed by the governor that we recognized that there was an additional 13 million. I think that's what the author is alluding to, is that pot, 13 million. I just want to make sure that the 15 million stays solid into the rainy day fund, and that this other source of funding on the 2% general fund reserve is only touching that 13 million that was inadvertently placed into the rainy day fund. So right now there's about 28 million in the rainy day fund, and I don't want to go beyond any kind of expenditure. So I think it's important that we identify in this amendment, in his amendment, we identify that 13 plus million that was inadvertently put into the rainy day fund. And I think that's important, because we don't want to go beyond that, or even though it's not beyond it, but I think it should be recognized. That's where we're going into. So I asked the author if he can, comment to that.
Does the author yield to the question?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, and to my colleague, if you look at my amendment, it says, or from the 2% general fund reserve in section 2.1 of Chapter 1 Public Law 36-54, General Appropriations Act of 2022, as amended. It's only specifically talking about the FY22 funds, not the additional money that's going in from this budget act. It's focusing only on the funds you identified. But there's no other way I can write. I mean, unless you want me to write, take 962,500 from 13. I mean, I don't see how I need to write it that way when it's very simple, the way the amendment's written, unless it's preferred. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Augustine. Senator Tideway?
Yeah, I think it should be preferred, because here, after 3 years of doing the budget, we never put any funding away into the rainy day fund when we had an opportunity to do so, and we definitely had excess revenue. So for the first time, in 3 years, we set aside $15 million for the rainy day fund for FY22, and that's what this is talking about, FY22. But like I said, there's that 13 million that was floating inadvertently that was put into the rainy day fund by the 2%. See, the 15% was appropriated into the rainy day fund. The 2% has to do with the 13 million. So, I mean, I know that the number of, the amount is 962, which doesn't come close to the 13 million. I understand that, but I'd feel more comfortable if there was language in here, or if you give me 1 minute, let me talk to legal to make sure it's something, and then
We'll take a short recess. We're back from recess. Senator Titlegy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm having a conversation with the author of the amendment. I believe there's going to be a withdrawal, so I'll stand down I'll yield.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to withdraw my amendment at the request of the author of the amendment. And I'm in support of her amendment to begin with. Thank you.
There's a motion to withdraw the amendment. On that motion, seeing no objections, motion carries. Now on the original amendment, Senator Nelson, you're recognized. I apologize. It is Senator Duenas was next in line to speak on the amendment proposed by Senator Nelson. Senator Duenas.
Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the amendment. This actually harkens back to what I was trying to explain in the beginning on a prior amendment. But to me, Mr. Chairman, this is even better because what it does is it basically makes an authorization. It doesn't appropriate automatically. It's only if there is excess revenue. And even in that event, Mr. Chairman, I believe by identifying the authorization, it still could be up to the discretion of the governor because the authorization is there. And normally that's what we would be doing. Another thing is this would be appropriating cash because it would be based on the remittance of the Section 30 where the money was available, not what we have been doing in other circumstances, which is appropriating unaudited financials carry forward or, as recognized, on the close of the books. But, we've seen what happened before, that there tends to be adjustments with regard to that on other obligations that were not recognized, and that's the purpose of the audit. So I think this is the proper way to do this. And the only way that it becomes an empty promise, in my opinion, is if it's not recognized as a priority. And like I said, in the event that the excess does come in, it's cash. You're not appropriating something that is, unaudited at the time. It's the remittance, and it's done as a transfer, and the money's in the bank. So I think this is the proper approach to this without changing revenues, but recognizing and just simply put this in authorization, and I think that's the right way to do it if that's the will of the body and a priority of the body. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Anyone else on the amendment? If there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Nelson.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank my colleagues. I do appreciate the withdrawal. Yes, I'm closing.
Yes,
Is there
Senator
anyone
Nelson,
else
you
that would
may
like to
close.
speak before I close? Okay, I'll yield.
Okay. Senator Nelson is yielding to her colleague, her co-sponsor on the amendment, who would like to speak on the amendment before Senator Nelson closes. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank the author of the amendment and our other co-sponsor for thinking of our students. Just the other day, it was mentioned earlier in session that we opened a new charter school, and it was really quite the sight for us to see so many children who were excited to return to a new campus, to be there for the first time actually, return to school on a brand new campus, and to hear the mission and the vision of this charter school. And we know that the other charter schools that are here on island are really working hard to be innovative places for our students to have an experience, to be to receive a quality education. And just as our GDOE public school system is providing our students, we have these schools that are charter schools that are essentially public schools as well, giving a new approach to education, a different approach to education that we see being a very successful type of approach. We heard at the opening of iLearn Academy that students are excelling, testing above average, winning competitions across the island, and we're very proud of the work that they're doing in the charter schools, in addition to the work of our GDOE counterparts. And we'd like to see this type of parity for all of our students, whether in the charter schools or in our public school system. And so I rise in support of this amendment and ask our colleagues to support it as well.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Anyone else on the amendment? Okay, Senator Nelson, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd also like to thank you for your patience in this time of deliberations. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their input on this amendment. Really, it's to make the charter schools whole. During the budget hearing, we discussed that what was a reasonable amount was $7,500. However, in previous discussions, they were hoping for $800, so we were able to meet them halfway. When the budget was proposed, we saw that there was a $500 gap. And so we looked to fulfill this gap through the Section 30 funds when they come in the month of September of this year. I do like to thank my colleague for also withdrawing the amendment of utilizing the rainy day funds, because just last week, we were in discussions with BBMR, and they explained to us that the $13 million is already in that rainy day fund, so there's a total of $28 million. And so I'd hate for us to move money out of the rainy day fund for other purposes when it's already captured, because for the past several years, we have not put any money in there, and we do not know what is going to impact Guam as a whole in the upcoming years. And so I humbly ask for my colleagues for their support. We are not increasing the revenue. We are ensuring that the revenue from Section 30, which the governor has asked for at the amount of $80.1 million, will be utilized, a portion of this will be utilized to prioritize our students and their education and their future. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. On the amendment, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on an amendment by Senator Shelton, co-sponsored by Senators Nelson and Senator San Augustine. This is SB 276 ALS, page 7. We'll take a moment's recess to make sure everyone has a copy of the amendment. The copies should have been passed out. It's also, it should also be in the drive, but we'll take a moment's recess to make sure everyone has the correct amendment in front of them before we proceed. Okay, we are back from recess, and everyone should have the amendment in front of them now. It's SB 276 ALS, page 7. Amendment was submitted by Senator Shelton, co-sponsored by Senators Nelson and San Augustine. Senator Shelton, you're recognized.
Assiduous Masi, Mr. Chair, this is an amendment that reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law, funds in excess of the adopted revenue levels enumerated in 1B of Section 2 of this chapter in the amount of $1,482,200 shall be appropriated to the Department of Administration for the purpose of increasing the cost of living allowance by $200 per retiree. Mr. Chair, there's been a lot of discussion over the last few days about the increase of COLA payments to our Gov Guam retirees to be included in this budget. As you know, earlier this year, we introduced a bill to raise the cost of living allowance paid to each retiree by $200 in 2022, and then to increase by $100 to meet the amount of $2,500 in the next several years. And so we had the public hearing on Bill 257-36 several months ago, where we received support from the Department of Administration, Director Ed Byrne, the director of the Gov Guam Retirement Fund, who shared with us that with the increase of pay to teachers and law enforcement officers, that the retirement fund may see some people choose to defer retirement. And so we wouldn't be seeing such a big increase to the number of retirees to grow this year. And that this was a feasible plan. And so even before passage of Bill 257, we know that this is something that we can include in today's budget for us to act on immediately and bring relief to our Manamku who are on fixed incomes. Very small amounts that they're living on, supporting their families, multi-generational households, and with the cost of living that continues to rise, and without any kind of increase to this cost of living allowance payment over the last almost a decade, this will be at least some kind of relief for our Gov Guam retirees. And this $200 in this year's Budget Act will make a big difference and be that first step for us to really give them the cost of living allowance that they deserve, an increase that will actually meet the numbers of inflation that they're experiencing in the grocery store, in their utility payments, at the gas pump, everywhere where we see it as lawmakers, as people out there living in our community are experiencing it. Our Manamku on fixed incomes without any other options are experiencing it just as much. And so we want to give them this type of relief by investing in our people. We know that this $200 is not going to stay in their pockets. It's not going to be $200 that they're putting in the bank to save. This is $200 that they will use immediately to pay for bills, to pay for food, to help support their families. And I ask our colleagues today to support this. Assiduous Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the amendment, Senator Titagui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment. And I'll go ahead and cite the amendment. It's SB 276 TTT LP7 COTW. Can you hold the clock? Can you take it back while they're looking for the amendment, please?
Yes, please revert the clock back to, go ahead and put it back to 10. We're just confirming that we have the correct amendment in front of us. We'll take a recess to make sure we have the correct amendment.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, we're going to go back in. Okay, everyone should have a copy of the amendment to the amendment proposed by Senator Titagui. And this is SB 276 TTT, page 7. Senator Titagui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I just wanted to give a little bit of background. On February 16th, I introduced a bill 253, which would codify $2,000 for COLA to our retirees. Because as we all know, this is not even codified in Guam law to provide this $2,000. So I introduced this bill on the premise that I would introduce the second bill, as I was still doing the research, not just on Guam, but federal law, as well as the Lola Cola attorneys that fought that as well, to get all the information I need to provide another bill. Then on February 18th, Senator Shelton had introduced her bill, 257. On April 5th, I finally introduced my bill, 285, on April 5th, which creates a working group that would create a formula on a cost of living adjustment. And then on May 16th, a public hearing was held for Senator Shelton's bill, but mine was not at all. All the bills should have been addressed when they were introduced, rather than wait until we were closer to an election. I've been trying to address a more realistic COLA adjustment since the beginning of February. And to this day, we have yet to have a public hearing for both of my bills. Now I'm forced to address the need to adjust the allowance a week and a half before an election, and this was exactly what I was trying to avoid. COLA should not have been addressed months before an election. It should not have. We're pandering here. We're pandering for votes just before an election on something so important as this, as helping our retirees with the rising cost of fuel, food, and other basic
Mr. Chair,
needs.
point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just address the statements that are being made that we're pandering to the public, trying to increase the cost of COLA. We've known that this has been a need. We've heard calls from our constituents in the Committee on Senior Citizens asking for us to increase the cost of living to our
Mr.
retirees.
Chair, it's just
and
a
this is
point
not
of
pandering to
personal
the public
privilege.
during an election year. We introduced this bill months out. We had a public hearing on Bill 257, which we are addressing through this amendment here today. And this is, those comments are uncalled for. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Let's please keep the comments specific to discussion on this specific amendment, please. Senator Titagui.
The amendment, Mr. Chair, as I explained earlier, that I want to proffer was something I introduced, which didn't have the ability to have a public hearing for one reason or another. I could say something about that too, but you know, just for the sake, I think everybody gets the hint. But a week and a half before an election, we're addressing something as important as this? We should have done it a long time ago. Our retirees are more important than that. An increase of $200 could still be shortchanging our retirees. This $200 is arbitrary. It's an arbitrary number with no data on the high cost of living we are experiencing today. None. But what this amendment does, it would create and apply a formula similar to what the federal government provides when they're adjusting their COLA, their cost of living, well, not their COLA, it's called their cost of living annuities for their retirees, which is the proper way of any adjustment and not pulling a number out of a hat. The amendment would just adjust the amounts based on retirees' annuity. I'm sure someone who makes in retirement $80,000 a year and above would probably not see the same cost of living adjustment as a retiree making only $20,000 a year, or even $10,000 a year. But yet we are asking to give a retiree who makes $80,000 a year an additional $200. Where's the logic in that? Where's the justification to our taxpayers? There is none. What the amendment does is creates a workforce that is put together to ensure we don't shortchange our Manamku, our retirees. They are on a fixed income, and they deserve to be able to know if 200 is going to be enough, if 300 is going to be enough. It's been 7 years since any help. This is provided by the federal government, too. The federal government allows this. They adjust their annuities every year based on inflation, even based on where they're living. So in the federal government, if you're living in Texas, it would be different from a retiree living in California. This assistance is to help individuals to put food on the table, to put a roof over their head. I can't see giving $200 to somebody who makes over $80,000 a year in retirement. This amendment also requires that the work group that's put together bases it on a sliding scale from 40,000 on up is based on a sliding scale. We can't just arbitrarily pull $200 and say this is what they get. That's not fair. That's not fair to our retirees who worked so hard for many years. We could be shortchanging them. This amendment provides that working group, brings comfort to our taxpayers, knowing that a formula was put together to assist the retirees and done correctly. They deserve it. I've been an advocate for adjusting the COLA living allowance to make it a cost of living adjustment. I've been working on this since February and was hoping to have the public hearing sometime at early of the year so that we don't have it a week and a half before the election. So I humbly ask my colleagues, I'm passionate about this because I've worked very hard on trying to find a win-win for everybody. Not just the retirees, but the taxpayers who pay for their annuities. I humbly ask my colleagues for their support on this amendment for these reasons. These reasons that make sense. A formula used for other retirees in the U.S. Let's not shortchange our retirees because 200 may not even be enough. And if we did this formula, I bet you it'd be a little bit more, a lot more for some. And remember, anyone who making $80,000, ask yourself, do they deserve the 200? So let's do the formula right. Let's adjust it to what their needs are today, the high cost of living today. Let's adjust it to that. And this working force will do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. On the amendment, would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? There's an objection to the amendment. Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment?
Can I have a roll call? Can you get a second?
Sure, but we're not calling for the vote yet. I'm going to allow you to close. Would you like to
Mr. Chair,
close?
I
Yes.
realize that some people have left, so I will withdraw my request for a roll call and ask who was the one that objected? There was an objection?
Yes.
Senator Torres objected? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I'll remove my request to do a roll call and just call for the vote.
We're going to allow others to speak at this time. There's some requests for discussion now. So Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was indeed a very impassioned discussion about the amendment to the amendment. And I know that the whole COLA issue, the reason we don't have it in statute and we reserve the ability to adjust it over time has to do with everything else, the climate, the availability of funds, and all of that. So my objection to this amendment is not principled on being against wanting to establish the need to determine, what the base is on Guam, what the needs are, the effects of the economy, that sort of thing. I mean, the way that COLA is administered federally too is more or less consistent with the way that we would approach it. There's an across-the-board kind of determination when it is adjusted. But what I just want to impress is that if something is, such as this, I believe requires good discourse, a bill, a public hearing, and there's nothing to prevent this from occurring, from a bill to go through and be passed with good discourse back and forth. There's nothing to prevent that. But I think what the original amendment does is it just at this point gives an allowance of up to 200 right now. There's nothing that prevents us from adjusting upward more frequently. There's nothing to prevent us from adjusting COLA as we deem necessary and as we deem appropriate and as we deem affordable to the government of Guam. But insofar as the amendment to the amendment, my objection is simply, it is something that I believe warrants a public hearing, and it is something that I think is not necessarily untimely if it is not addressed today in this budget bill. So that I wanted to clarify is being the reason for objection, and is purely a pragmatic approach to what I think is important in the halls of the legislature when we debate what is the best course of action and when the best course is to be implemented. So it's simply that. And with that, I again express my objection to this amendment to the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the amendment to the amendment? Senator Nelson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too share issue with this amendment to the amendment. So this looks to create a special cost of living economic service, which may collectively work with the special economic service. So it looks like we're appropriating close to $1.5 million to create almost like an assessment or a study, and it involves the chairman of Legislature and Guahan's Committee on Ways and Means, okay, or equivalent standing committee who shall serve as the chairperson, the director of the Office of Finance and Budget, the director of BBMR, Bureau of Budget and Management Research, the director of the Government of Guam Retirement Fund, the chief economist of the Department of Labor, the chief economist of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, an economist from the University of Guam, and a representative from the Guam Chamber of Commerce appointed by the Speaker of Legislature in Guahan. And so some of the challenges I see also is to really have these people in the proper form come in and discuss what practices and what approach and what formula that they plan on using, and is that formula vetted, especially with our retirement fund. And to singularly just include Guam Chamber of Commerce, there are other chambers of commerce on Guam, and so, we don't know if they would be interested also in being a part of this committee, because I believe they do represent a good part of the population of our COLA retirees, and also understanding our economy. And then it has this formula here where it says the report shall also contain a cost of living adjustment and a declining sliding scale COLA adjustment scheduled to implement any recommended increase above the $2,000 COLA authorized by this act. A declining sliding scale schedule shall be included in the report, applied to a retiree's base retirement annuity commencing at $40,000 with a designated cap. So really, I don't understand I don't even know if we have any feedback from the retirement fund to give us a clear understanding of what that will do. And the speaker of the amendment, the proffer of the amendment, did mention that there is yet to be a public hearing, and I believe that the public hearing to introduce this bill and move forward would be the proper avenue for everyone as a community to come forward. Otherwise, we're just throwing in an amendment to try to force something forward. So that's my concern, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Anyone else on the amendment to the amendment? Okay, seeing no one, Senator Tideway, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I about used up, I heard that our 10 minutes is on the opening and closing, so I believe I used up my time, but I thank those who spoke and ask my colleagues to, this is the responsible way of doing it to address our minimum, and they deserve it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I have a minute more to go?
Yes.
Okay.
You actually have a
Well,
minute and 20 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned, the previous speaker, about those who are involved in this working group to come together. These are the right people as far to assess what the cost of living. They would meet twice a year before we go into budget. Before we're here, they would assess, what truly is the cost of living allowance for the retirees based on all kind of variables. It's a formula used, the same kind of formula that's used with the federal government. As far as talking with the retirement agent had nothing, what's her name, Paula, had no issues with this bill that I had introduced back in April. In fact, some of the questions that were brought up during the public hearing in May, a month following, almost over a month following, some of the questions I brought up were the same thing with regards to my bill, especially when it came to that's why the 40,000 marker was in there as a designated cap, and to start a sliding scale to adjust. That was put in there by retirement. Mr. Chair, you and I both know sometimes, we can't get our bills in for one reason or another, and this is an opportunity that we can get our
Senator
amendments. Okay, thank
Tideway,
you.
your
So
time
thank you,
is
Mr. Chair,
expired.
and ask my colleagues to please support this amendment to the amendment.
Thank you, Senator Tideway. There's been an objection to the amendment to the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please signify by raising your hand. All those in favor signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. We are on the original amendment sponsored by Senator Shelton. Anyone on the Shelton amendment? If there's no one else on this amendment, Senator Shelton, you may close.
Mr. Masi, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank everyone for the discussion on the amendment. And I know we can all agree that we want to help our Gov Guam retirees. And there's really no time for us to wait to provide this help to them. There was a point brought up on what the justification was of $200 for the amount to increase the COLA. And we worked with the Office of Finance and Budget, then we heard from DOA and BBMR and the retirement fund, and this was an amount that we could immediately implement to provide the help that is needed by our Gov Guam retirees. Though we'd love to provide more money in this fiscal year, we knew that this was a safe and conservative amount that we could introduce in Bill 257, and then today include in this budget bill. And so that's how we came about with the $200. And in Bill 257, that is where we see an increase in the amount of COLA by $100 every year until it reaches $2,500. And so that is something that has had a public hearing that we hope to act on after this budget bill. Again, this is a small amount of money that our retirees have been asking for, are now looking forward to in this Budget Act. There's been a lot of discussion over the last few days about COLA, and we want to provide them this help. And so I thank all of our colleagues who are here for supporting our retirees, for wanting to provide them this little extra bump in their cost of living allowance, to bring a little more comfort to their lives after many years of service to the government of Guam, to be able to live, I'm sure, very frugal lifestyles. And I want to let our colleagues know that those who are making over $80,000, who are a part of this 7,000 retirees that we're giving COLA to every year, is minimal. Most of our retirees make under $40,000 a year. We know on our salary here in the legislature, that's just a little bit more than them, and it's hard for us to live on, but it's something that we make do with. And so most of them live on so much less than that. There are not many that are making over $80,000 in our retirees. So I'd like to ask for the support of our colleagues here today to bring this small amount to our COLA recipients. So just Masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. On the Shelton amendment, are there any objections?
Mr. Chair, if I
Senator
can take
Tideway?
a short recess, I think there may be a conflict of interest, some of our members of this body who receive COLA. So if we can just get a clarification with the clerk, our legal.
We'll take a moment's recess. Okay, we're back from recess. There were some questions brought up regarding eligibility for voting. According to Chapter 45 of Mason's Manual, rules governing voting in general, all must vote unless excused by the body. So that's the first issue. Second is members are barred from voting only if there's a clear case and when the issue is particularly personal to someone. And what that means, in my interpretation of it, as well as consultation with legal, is that if a vote on something is of particular interest to a single person and not to a category of people. So that's the discussion I've had with the legal counsel. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. Are there any objections to the amendment? We're on the, any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. Okay, colleagues, it is now 5 p.m. I'm going to go ahead and call recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow. We're at recess.